She woke up in darkness. Not the ordinary darkness of sleep or night, but a darkness so thick it felt alive, pressing against her skin, whispering fear. At first, she couldn't even remember how she got there. There was no ceiling she could see, no walls she could touch, only silence and cold damp air. Her head pounded, her throat burned for breath. She tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy, as though weighted down by lead. A deep, hollow dread claimed her heart, as if every beat echoed in an empty tomb. She had been missing for 8 weeks. 8 long, suffocating weeks. But no one, not her friends, not her family, suspected this was where she was being held. A silent coffin beneath their feet. Tonight. Just tonight. She would finally get out. After the first panic, her mind jolted with a sharp clarity. I need to survive. And survive she did for 88 days. When she was first abducted, it happened so fast she barely understood what was happening. One moment she was walking home under a dim streetlight. The next, a van screeched to a halt beside her. I hated. Hiss a hand, clamped over her mouth, and everything went black. She tried to scream, but fear, pure, unadulterated fear, ripped the sound from her throat. By the time she regained consciousness, she was underground, not in a hail, not in a prison cell, but in a makeshift tomb built by a man she had never known, somewhere deep beneath the city. The air was stale, suffocating, only slightly less heavy than the weight of despair that threatened to crush her. Her first attempts at escape were desperate, clumsy. She clawed at the walls, tried to scream, shouted when she realized no one could hear her. The walls, damp concrete, cold and unyielding, offered no purchase. Her voice was swallowed by darkness. Tears came, then sobs, then a deep, hollow silence. But after the sobbing came a stubborn spark. A spark she didn't know she had. Over the first few days, she studied she memorized every inch of the floor, the walls, the slight slope, the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. She discovered slowly that the floor sometimes shook when heavy footsteps passed overhead. She learned the rhythm of the kidnappers' patrols. She counted the days by the sound of footsteps, the distant hum of engines, the stale air's shifting weight. And then one morning, or what she guessed as morning, she realized something startling. She could still smell fresh air. Husta faint. Distant trace, like a ghost of wind. It lingered in her memory and became her anchor. Logic told her there must be a shaft, a vent, some passage to the surface, hidden somewhere. That realization changed everything. From that moment, she no longer saw herself as a victim. She was a survivor. Click. INFO. At about 1 minute in, what followed was an 88-day ordeal of feigned compliance and silent resistance. She ate only what was given, often scraps, cold, stale, but she kept her mind sharp. She spoke when spoken to, nodded when commanded. But inside, she never stopped watching, listening, learning, marking every pattern, every guard step, every crack in the concrete, every shift in the stale air. Because she knew, deep down, that her only hope wasn't brute force. It was patience and timing. Days blurred at first. Hunger gnawed at her bones. Thirst parched her lips. The air was thick with damp and rot. Every breath felt like inhaling sorrow. Sometimes she hallucinated when she thought she saw sunlight. Once she thought she heard her mother's voice. The mind plays tricks when hope is dying, but she forced herself back into reality. There was no release, no escape. At least not yet. Slowly, she began to ration her scraps. A single stale piece of bread might last 2 days. A damp sip of water, once a day. She learned to sleep in shifts, doingen drifting, always listening. Every groan, every drip of water, every distant sound she catalogued. Her captor visited only occasionally, a dark figure whose face she never saw. Tall, broad, always masked. He never spoke much. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes only silence, but always threat. The weight of fear, the terrible, unspoken or else. Still, she survived. Then after almost 2 weeks underground, she heard something new. A faint rat scurrying across the floor, not just one, dozens. Feet, claws, tiny bodies shifting through darkness. At first, she recoiled in disgust and fear, but soon she realized maybe these creatures could help her. Maybe the vents they used could lead somewhere. She crawled toward the sound, inch by inch, her fingers tracing cracks she hadn't noticed. She whispered to herself, if not me, then no one. If not now, then never. She pressed her ear to the cold concrete. Her breath echoed, and in that silence, she heard it. Faint, almost inaudible, a rush of air, a whisper of wind. Her heart jolted. This was it. The proof, the sign she had been waiting for. Could that tiny breath of air, a mere whisper in the dark, be the difference between life and death? Could those rats, despised creatures, become her only allies in the fight for freedom? For 88 tortured days, she held on to that fragile thread of hope, and in the next 2 minutes, she was going to make her move. She waited until the guard footsteps faded, the muffled echo of distant voices. The patrol's rhythm faded away. Then, she moved. Slow, silent, her body low against the floor, her hands brushing concrete and cold metal scraps. She followed the damp smell, the rat noises, the faint draft. Her mind screamed with fear. Every tiny noise threatened to give her away, but she kept going. The rats led her to a thin gap in the wall, barely noticeable, like a crack in a tomb. She pressed her hand against it. It trembled slightly. Breath shallow, she pushed harder. The concrete cracked under her fingers, small shards falling into the damp soil beneath. The gap widened, just enough for a sliver of light to pour through. A sliver, but enough to rekindle hope. She reached through. Her fingertips brushed wood. She felt the grain. She touched cold metal, a rusted grill, a mesh door, some old vent. Her heart raced. That was it. That had to be it. But it wasn't over. The vent was narrow, maybe only a foot wide. She couldn't fit, she realized with horror. If she tried to crawl through, the metal would scrape her, maybe trap her. There might be sharp edges. The risk of injury was high, and if she got stuck, there would be no rescue, no help. Yet, she had no choice. Her body was bruised, her spirit battered. Every second underground sapped her will. Every breath brought pungent dampness and decay. 88 days, gone. So she made a decision. She would not waste this chance. She pushed onward, into the unknown. Her only companions, fear and determination. Would she find air, or only deeper darkness? Would that small crack lead her to freedom, or to a fate worse than underground? In the next 2 minutes, she would find out. She forced herself to inch forward. The metal grill scraped against her arms. She sobbed softly, hiding the sound, stifling the pain. She pressed her body against the cold metal, used every ounce of strength to drag herself through. Her lungs burned, her limbs screamed, but she kept going. Then the narrow metal corridor ended. She was inside a shaft, a ventilation shaft, a shaft, narrow, old, covered with rust and dust, but a shaft nonetheless. Light drifted from above, a faint, golden light that flickered like a promise. Her heart thundered. She climbed, inch by inch, hand over hand, scraping skin on rusted metal. Every movement threatened collapse, every breath a gasp of pain. But she climbed. When she pushed her head through the grate at the top, the world opened. Cold night air stung against her lungs. She gasped, deep, desperate, as though she had never breathed. And then, stars, city lights, sky. sky. For a moment, she froze. The world too bright, too loud, the street lamps too yellow. The cars too noisy, the air too real. Then she did something she never thought she could. She screamed. Her voice, raw and hoarse, echoed against the walls. It rang out across the night. People came, startled. A passerby stopped. Then another. Then sirens. She was alive. Finally alive, after 88 days of darkness, of fear, starvation, despair. One narrow shaft, a handful of rats, and a crack in the concrete gave her a second chance at life. But what she had endured would haunt her forever. What she had seen, unsorbibit, would shape her forever. And that's not even the half of it. Because once she got out, the fight for justice began. And the real horror was only just beginning. Over the next hours, the police, the medical examiners, detectives, they came. The weak, trembling girl was hoisted out of a cage, wrapped in blankets, led under the harsh glare of flashlights and cameras. Her eyes, hollow but alive. They told a story no one would believe. Not yet. Not family, friends. The glare of cameras, the flurry of questions, statements, official reports. They all clamored for details. But she couldn't speak. Not yet. Her mind reeled with memories. The rusted walls, the damp smell, the dripping water, the cold, the hunger, the rats, the air shaft, the climb, the light. She felt hollow, exhausted, broken, but alive. And that first night out of the underground, she lay in a hospital bed, eyes closed, trembling. The world outside moved on. Lights flickered. People talked. Phones rang. Ambulances wailed. But none of it reached her. Not yet. Her mind drifted back to the darkness, to the floor, to the rats, to the shaft, to the promise of freedom that had finally come true. They thought her nightmare was over. They thought rescue was the end. But escape was only the beginning, because when she started to speak, when investigators asked questions, a shocking truth was about to unravel. Who had kidnapped her? Why? How many more were there? And how deep did this terror go? In the next 2 minutes, the first piece of the horror she'd uncover would blow open the entire case. As dawn broke, the detectives probed. They searched her memory. Details. Small details. A scratch on the wall. A faint smell. Muffled voices. Snippets of speech overheard. Slowly, painfully, she began to reconstruct the timeline. She remembered the day she was snatched. A black van with tinted windows. No license plate. No markings. Just a screech of tires. A hiss. She remembered the voice. Low. Calm. No anger. Just a voice telling her to keep quiet. Keep still. That everything would be okay if she cooperated. She remembered footsteps on the metal stairs overhead. She remembered distant footsteps echoing off concrete. She remembered the faint hum of engines. She remembered a name. A whispering name. A name she was never meant to hear. When she told them, the investigators froze. Because that name belonged to a powerful man. A man whose face never touched the darkness with her, not directly. A man who pulled strings from the shadows. Her kidnapping wasn't random. It wasn't about ransom. It wasn't about a crime of passion. This was planned. Methodical. Evil. And as investigators began to dig, the horror they discovered went deeper than she ever imagined. What started as a single girl's abduction suddenly exposed a network of corruption, deception, and horror. And every piece they uncovered threatened to unravel lives, including hers. But she had one weapon left. Her truth. Her pain. Her survival. In the next minutes, what she revealed would shock the world. She told them about other victims, names whispered in darkness, voices silenced by fear, bodies hidden underground, lives, air, Herasit. At first, detectives were skeptical to many names, to many claims, but as they followed her leads, visited abandoned warehouses, inspected underground shafts, questioned suspects. Evidence began to pour in. DNA matches, abandoned tools, hidden cellar walls, old locks, footprints in dust, broken concrete, rusted metal scraps. One by one, victims were found, rescued, freed, or in tragic cases, too late. Her story became the key, the spark that ignited the largest investigation of its kind. A network of kidnappers, traffickers, silent criminals operating beneath the city's veneer. And everywhere the city had looked away, she forced them to stare. They called her the girl who escaped. But the truth was darker than that title could capture, because escaping the cell was just the beginning, escaping the nightmare that would take far more. In the next segment, you'll hear what she had to give up and what she had to become to survive. The girl had survived the unimaginable. She had crawled through darkness, scraped against rusted metal, felt every ounce of her body scream, and finally tasted the sweet, raw air of freedom. But the nightmare wasn't over. The moment she spoke, the investigators realized the abduction wasn't an isolated crime. Names tumbled from her lips like shards of broken glass. People who had vanished in silence, whispers of shadows long forgotten. Each memory she recalled was a thread leading deeper into a web of horror that stretched across the city. Her survival had a price. She would not only relive every second underground, but become the key to exposing a network so meticulously hidden that even the police had missed it for years. Some stories end with escape. Hers was just beginning. The underground cell had held her body for 88 days, but it couldn't hold the truth, and that truth would shock a city. The investigation began methodically. Detectives revisited abandoned warehouses, inspecting every crack, every rusted vent. They traced faint footprints, collected dust samples, analyzed fibers on walls. Every clue matched a detail. She remembered the scrape on the concrete, the metallic temps in the air, the faint hum of distant engines. The more they uncovered, the darker the picture became. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It wasn't a random attack by a stranger. It was planned, strategic, and it involved more people than anyone had imagined. She remembered the first night. Underground, the oppressive darkness, the cold concrete pressing against her back, the muffled footsteps above. But now, with detectives listening, her memories became evidence. The vents she had followed, the narrow gaps she had squeezed through, even the faint scurrying of rats, all became critical pieces of the puzzle. Every day spent underground had sharpened her senses. She noticed patterns in her captors' movements, subtle changes in routine, and the timing of food deliveries. These small observations, once a matter of survival, now became vital clues. The abduction had a purpose she hadn't understood at the time, but now it was clear. She was chosen, targeted. The kidnappers weren't amateurs. They were methodical, organized, and ruthless, and the network stretched far beyond what anyone could imagine. Evidence started to point to an organized trafficking ring. Other victims were discovered, some barely alive, some too late to save. Investigators traced connections between the sites, the perpetrators, and even corrupt officials who had turned a blind eye for years. The girl's memories became crucial. Every detail mattered. The sound of locks, the pattern of guard rotations, the location of hidden tools. Without her recollections, the case might have remained buried. How did a single girl's survival unravel an entire criminal network? And what she revealed next would make even hardened detectives shiver. As more victims were found, the psychological weight of survival became apparent. Some were broken, traumatized beyond recognition. Some had been held for months, even years. The girl had endured 88 days underground, but each person rescued added a layer of horror to the story. And still, the girl had to testify, to relive the fear, to recall the sounds, the smells, the terror that had consumed her. Each word she spoke was a risk. She feared retaliation, feared that the shadow she had escaped might reach her again. The media caught wind of the story. The girl who survived 88 days became a headline, a viral sensation. The public was captivated, horrified, and amazed at once. They wanted to know, how did she survive? How did she escape? And most importantly, who was behind this nightmare? Yet for her, it was not about fame. It was about justice. Every report, every news segment, every flashing camera reminded her of the lives that were still in danger. Every rescued victim depended on her testimony. Survival was only the first battle. Exposing the truth was the war, and every moment counted. As the investigation deepened, the authorities discovered something chilling. The kidnappers had been watching her long before the abduction. Surveillance photos, tracking devices, even coded messages hinted at premeditation on a scale that was terrifying. She had been a pawn in a game much larger than she realized, and the stakes were higher than ever. Not just for her, but for everyone connected to the case. She remembered the fear, the isolation, 88 days of darkness, broken only by occasional interaction with her captor. She had learned to hide emotion, to feign compliance, while internally planning every move. Every meal rationed, every observation catalogued, every breath measured. Those same skills, patience, attention to detail, mental endurance, now became tools to aid investigators. Every recollection helped them map the network, anticipate moves, and prevent further abductions. Could one girl's memory really dismantle a criminal empire? Her next revelation would shock even the most seasoned investigators. She spoke of hidden passages, makeshift locks, the tools used to confine her. Each description led detectives to new discoveries: tunnels, hidden cellars, and more victims. The web was more extensive than anyone anticipated, and every detail she remembered was a thread unraveling a tapestry of crime. Investigators realized the kidnappers were meticulous, almost surgical in their operations. They had planned escapes, misdirections, and even created false leads to confused authorities. But they hadn't counted on her memory, her endurance, or her refusal to break completely. She became a symbol of resilience. For victims still trapped, she was a beacon of hope. For investigators, a guide through the labyrinth of darkness, and for the public, she was a chilling reminder of the dangers that could exist right under their feet. The escape was miraculous, but surviving the aftermath, navigating the legal system, the media frenzy, the emotional trauma, that was a battle of a different kind. Could she endure it all? The court proceedings began. Every detail she had endured became testimony. Every fact she recalled was scrutinized. Prosecutors relied on her memory, her observations, to construct airtight cases against the kidnappers. Her endurance underground translated into evidence above ground. The network began to unravel. Arrests followed arrests. The city watched as the shadowy criminals who had once operated unseen were brought to light. Yet through it all, she remained haunted. The darkness she had endured didn't leave her when she returned to sunlight. Nightmares persisted. Every shadow reminded her of the cell. Every sound of footsteps brought back echoes of fear. Escaping was one thing. Living afterward, coping, remembering, testifying, that was another. And in the next part of her story, the psychological battle begins, revealing the hidden scars that survival alone couldn't erase. Therapy sessions began. Professionals helped her navigate trauma, slowly untangling fear from reality. Flashbacks were frequent, panic attacks relentless. Yet each session brought understanding, resilience, and strategies to reclaim her life. Her story became a case study, her courage an example, and yet she often felt the weight of survivor-esque guilt, the haunting question of why she lived while others did. Surviving 88 days underground was a feat few could imagine, but the true test, living with the memory, confronting the criminals, and finding justice, had only just begun. The investigation expanded nationwide. Authorities traced funding streams, communications, and accomplices. The girl's testimony linked multiple criminal acts together, exposing a sophisticated ring with tentacles stretching far beyond the city. The public watched in awe and horror as the full extent of the operation was revealed. What had started as a single abduction became a story of systemic criminality, endurance, and the power of human resilience. She became more than a survivor. She became a catalyst for justice. Every revelation she provided saved lives, prevented further crimes, and inspired others to speak out. Her 88-day ordeal, once a private horror, became a public force for change. From darkness to daylight, from fear to testimony, her journey wasn't just about escape. It was about uncovering the truth, holding perpetrators accountable, and showing the world that even in the darkest moments, courage could prevail. By the end of the investigation, dozens of perpetrators were arrested. Victims were rescued. Families and through it all, the girl who had endured 88 days underground stood as a testament to the human spirit. She had faced death, despair, and darkness, and emerged not only alive, but unbroken. But even after justice was served, the echoes of the underground cell remained. The trauma, the memories, the fear, they didn't vanish. In the next part, you'll hear how she rebuilt her life, reclaimed her identity, and faced the lingering shadows of her captivity. Even after she emerged into sunlight, the world felt foreign. Her body had been free for days, yet her mind remained trapped in the darkness. Every shadow seemed to hold the cell she had escaped. Every corner whispered the footsteps of her captor. She woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced she was still underground. Freedom didn't erase the nightmare. 88 days underground had left marks that would never fully heal. And now, the fight was no longer just to survive, it was to live. Therapists began to help her untangle the trauma. She spoke little at first, struggling to articulate fear that had been ingrained for nearly 3 months. Panic attacks came without warning, sudden, suffocating, leaving her gasping and shaking. Flashbacks transported her back to the damp walls, the rat noises, the faint air in the vent. Slowly, she learned to ground herself. Breathing exercises, visualization techniques, and careful routines became her lifeline. Yet every step forward was painstaking. Every memory she revisited in therapy brought a mix of empowerment and horror. She had survived, but at a cost that only she fully understood. Surviving the cell was just the beginning. The deeper battle would be against the invisible scars, trauma, fear, and a world that didn't understand what she had endured. Every day was a struggle to reclaim her sense of safety. Public attention became overwhelming. Media outlets covered her story relentlessly, turning her survival into headlines and viral videos. While she wanted to remain private, she knew her visibility could help others. Her case sparked nationwide awareness about abductions, trafficking, and the hidden dangers lurking in seemingly safe communities. But attention was a double-edged sword. Well-meaning strangers flooded our social media, and sensationalist reports twisted details for drama. She had escaped a literal underground prison, only to feel imprisoned by the glare of public scrutiny. Even with freedom, she could not escape the shadows, and the world outside was just as complex as the darkness below. Could she navigate the post-drama chaos and still find herself? Meanwhile, the investigation into the kidnapping network intensified. Law enforcement traced financial transactions, communications, and accomplices. With her testimony, investigators uncovered links to multiple criminal operations, each more horrifying than the last. She was invited to give statements to various law enforcement agencies, each time reliving the ordeal. Details of her captivity, the tiny scratches, the subtle shifts in air, Tanaro bent, became vital evidence. Without her recollections, many victims might never have been found. Despite the horror, she began to regain small pieces of normalcy. She could eat a proper meal without fear. She could walk outside in daylight. She could hear a door close and know she was safe. Yet the trauma lingered. Loud noises, sudden shadows, or unfamiliar footsteps could send her heart racing, her mind plunging back into the cell. Every step forward came with a reminder of what she had survived. And yet, she began to realize that her experience could save lives if she found the courage to speak out. Court proceedings began in earnest. Prosecutors relied heavily on her testimony. She described the kidnappers, the layout of the underground cell, and the sequence of events that led to her eventual escape. Each word she spoke helped secure convictions. Each description painted a terrifying picture of methodical, organized evil. Some perpetrators were unaware she had memorized the smallest details. The rusted metal, the ventilation gap, the sounds of footsteps. Her precise recollections ensured that justice could not be obstructed. Yet even as arrests were made, the emotional toll on her was immense. She struggled with survivor's guilt, wondering why she had survived when others didn't. She haunted herself with thoughts of the victims still lost, the ones who had vanished without a trace. Each breakthrough in the investigation brought both relief and renewed anguish. Her escape had exposed a terrifying criminal network, but surviving the aftermath, the courtroom battles, the media attention, and the psychological scars proved to be an equally harrowing ordeal. Therapy became a constant presence. She learned to recognize triggers, to identify panic onset, and to implement coping strategies. She wrote in journals, drawing maps of her memories, tracing every movement she had made underground. Each act was a small reclaiming of control over a life that had been stripped from her. Slowly, the shadows receded. Not completely, they would never fully disappear, but enough that she could start living again. She began to reconnect with family, rebuild friendships, and re-engage with a world that had once seemed so alien. She had survived the darkness physically, but the mental battles would define the rest of her life. Could she ever feel safe again? Could she ever trust? Could she forgive herself for simply surviving when so many others had not? As the court case unfolded, shocking revelations came to light. The kidnappers were part of a larger network, operating not just in her city, but across multiple states. Authorities discovered connections to other crimes, including trafficking, extortion, and organized disappearances. Her escape had triggered a cascade of arrests that law enforcement hadn't anticipated. With each conviction, her story gained credibility. Yet, for her, the victories were bittersweet. Every new detail about the network reminded her of the days spent underground, the smell of damp concrete, the isolation, the fear. She also became a resource for other survivors. Counselors, law enforcement, and advocacy groups sought her insights. Her experience became a tool for preventing future abductions and helping those still trapped in darkness. She transformed her trauma into a weapon against the criminals who once held her captive. From terrified victim to survivor, witness, and advocate, her journey revealed a profound truth. Survival is just the first step. The real fight is living beyond the nightmare. Public recognition came gradually. She was invited to speak at conferences, participate in awareness campaigns, and collaborate with organizations dedicated to combating trafficking. She remained cautious, protecting her identity in certain contexts, but she used her platform to amplify the voices of those still unheard. Each story she shared reinforced the urgency of vigilance. Each lecture and interview served as both warning and inspiration. She transformed the darkness that had once imprisoned her into light for others. Her ordeal underground had ended, but the mission she embraced above ground had only begun. Could one survivor truly make a difference against an organized criminal empire? She was about to show the world that courage could ignite change. Meanwhile, psychological challenges continued. Sleep was often elusive. She battled moments of panic when confronted with tight spaces or unfamiliar environments. Memories of the cell invaded her thoughts unexpectedly. Yet each day, she found strategies to cope. Meditation, therapy, journaling, and a careful support network allowed her to reclaim autonomy over her mind and body. She learned that healing wasn't linear. Some days brought immense progress, others, regression. She adapted, persevered, and found strength in the very survival instincts that had kept her alive underground. Even as she faced fear, trauma, and exhaustion, her story became a beacon, a reminder that even the darkest experiences can be transformed into hope, justice, and change. It's clear that surviving the cell was only the beginning. The psychological scars, the legal battles, and the mission to expose a criminal empire were chapters of a story that would resonate far beyond her personal ordeal. Her courage, determination, and resilience set the stage for the next part. The final unraveling of the criminal network, the ultimate court battles, and the profound impact of one girl's fight for justice. The courtroom was tense. Every eye was fixed on her as she took the stand once again. 88 days of underground terror had been a private nightmare. But now, she had to confront the public face of her captors. Every word mattered. Every detail she recounted could tip the scales of justice. She had survived the darkness. Now she had to face them, the men who had planned, executed, and hidden her torment. Could the truth alone be enough to bring justice? She described the underground cell in chilling detail. The narrow gaps, the ventilation shafts, the damp concrete walls, the faint trickle of water, the minimal food, the sound of rats. The jurors listened in stunned silence. Some gasped, others sat frozen, unable to comprehend the extent of her suffering. Her voice didn't waver, but inside, every word dredged up the fear, the despair, the relentless hunger and isolation she had endured. She had survived underground, but reliving it in full detail was almost unbearable. Her testimony became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. It connected multiple suspects to the crime, exposed hidden accomplices, and confirmed the existence of an elaborate trafficking network operating undetected for years. The network's reach was astonishing. Detectives had discovered that the kidnappers had manipulated and corrupted multiple people in positions of power. They had used silent intimidation, coded messages, and surveillance to remain invisible. Until she survived and spoke, her survival was no accident. Every precaution she had taken while underground documenting, memorizing, observing, became critical evidence. Each memory of tiny details helped the investigators connect the dots that law enforcement alone couldn't see. Every word she spoke had the power to dismantle a criminal empire. But with every revelation, the danger didn't vanish. It merely lurked in the shadows, waiting for opportunity. Could the network retaliate even as it crumbled? As the trial progressed, witnesses were called. Former victims testified. Investigators presented photographs of abandoned tunnels, hidden tools, and surveillance devices. Forensic evidence backed up her recollections. Fingerprints, DNA, and fiber analysis corroborated her story. The web of deception began to unravel before the courtroom's eyes. Yet, for her, the pressure was immense. She had endured nearly 3 months underground, faced death daily, and now she was confronting the same men and the many people they had manipulated under bright lights and public scrutiny. The escape had been miraculous, but confronting the perpetrators in court was a different kind of test, one that required courage of a different magnitude. Could she hold her ground under the weight of terror, scrutiny, and memory? The prosecution meticulously walked the jury through the chain of events, using her testimony to expose motives, and highlight the meticulous planning behind the abduction. Every scrap of detail she remembered: the scrape on the wall, the pattern of guard movements, even the faint air vent became evidence that couldn't be dismissed. She described how she had survived, rationing food, mapping the space in her mind, listening for patterns, and using patience as a weapon. The jury heard about the ventilation shaft, the narrow gap, and the tiny sliver of light that had led to her escape. The kidnappers attempted to challenge her testimony, casting doubt on her recollection and questioning her credibility. But the corroborating evidence, photographs, fingerprints, physical remnants of the underground cell, and testimonies from other victims left little room for doubt. The trial wasn't just about proving her survival, it was about dismantling a sophisticated criminal operation. Every answer she gave, every memory she recounted, became a weapon against those who had thrived in darkness. Outside the courtroom, public attention intensified. News outlets covered every day of testimony. Social media discussions debated the details. She became a symbol not only of survival but of courage in the face of calculated evil. Yet she remained focused on justice, not attention. Her mission was clear: expose the criminals and ensure they could harm no one else. The defendant's defense teams tried every tactic: delay, obfuscation, questioning the reliability of her memories. But her precision .com under pressure, and the corroborating forensic evidence made it nearly impossible for them to cast doubt. Jurors could feel the authenticity in her words. Every pause, every inflection, every detail carried the weight of truth. Would the courtroom finally deliver the justice she had fought for every day of her underground ordeal? Or would the cunning of the kidnappers prevail once again? As the trial reached its peak, shocking revelations emerged. Investigators disclosed hidden accomplices, including individuals who had assisted the kidnappers in concealing victims and facilitating abductions. Emails, encrypted messages, and financial records tied multiple people to the criminal network. Her escape had not only saved her, but exposed a vast operation that had remained in the shadows for years. Every conviction, every sentence handed down brought her closer to closure, but it also reminded her of the victims who had not survived. Survivor's guilt weighed heavily. Therapy sessions continued, helping her manage flashbacks, nightmares, and the lingering fear that, even now, Danger might lurk nearby. The courtroom battles ended, but the emotional scars remained. Survival had been only one chapter. Healing and seeking justice was a journey that would test her every day. She continued to work with law enforcement, advising on security protocols and strategies to prevent future abductions. Her experience became invaluable in understanding how predators operate, how victims cope, and how investigations could be conducted with precision. Through interviews, conferences, and collaborations, she transformed personal trauma into a broader mission. Her story was no longer just about escape. It was about empowerment, awareness, and justice for countless others who might otherwise remain victims. From darkness to daylight, from terror to testimony, her journey illustrated a profound truth. Survival is just the beginning. Courage, clarity, and determination can turn even the most harrowing experiences into instruments of change. By the end of Part 4, the criminal network had been systematically dismantled. Many perpetrators faced life sentences. Victims were identified, rescued, and supported through rehabilitation programs. And she, once a terrified girl trapped underground, emerged as a symbol of resilience, a living testament to the power of endurance and truth. Her ordeal underground, the legal battles, and the exposure of the network had forever changed her life. But in reclaiming her freedom, she also reclaimed her voice and used it to ensure that the darkness she had survived could never claim another victim without consequence. Her story was no longer just about surviving 88 days in a cell. It was about shining light on hidden horrors, seeking justice, and proving that even in the face of unimaginable terror, human courage could prevail. Freedom had been won, but the journey to healing had only just begun. 88 days underground had left scars far deeper than any visible wound. Every shadow, every sound, every unexpected noise reminded her of the cell she had escaped. Yet, she was determined not to let her trauma define her life. She had survived the impossible. But surviving wasn't enough. The real challenge was living, truly living after darkness had held her captive for nearly 3 months. Therapy became a cornerstone of her recovery. She learned to confront the memories that haunted her, to differentiate between past danger and present safety, and to reclaim control over her mind. Nightmares persisted, but she developed coping strategies, grounding exercises, breathing techniques, and the practice of rewriting her story in her mind, from fear to empowerment. She also found strength in sharing her story. Speaking publicly, she became a voice for other survivors. Her experience provided insight into criminal networks, victim psychology, and the resilience required to endure trauma. Her ordeal had sparked national awareness about abductions and human trafficking. Through interviews, public appearances, and collaborations with advocacy groups, she became a guiding force in preventing future kidnappings and supporting survivors. Family and friends rallied around her, offering support and stability. Yet, rebuilding relationships wasn't simple. Her trauma had altered her perception of trust and safety. Small gestures, sudden noises, and even proximity to strangers could trigger fear. But each day, she practiced courage, opening herself to love, connection, and the world beyond her memories. The darkness had shaped her, but it would not define her. Could she transform fear into strength and tragedy into purpose? Gradually, she returned to aspects of her old life, school, hobbies, and community. But everything was different now. Her sense of time had shifted. She appreciated moments she once took for granted. Simple things, sunlight, laughter, the sound of birds, became anchors of life she had almost lost. Her story, once private and terrifying, became a catalyst for change. Law enforcement agencies consulted her for training on abduction survival and risk prevention. Advocacy organizations used her experiences to educate the public. She became a symbol not just of survival, but of empowerment. She had emerged from the shadows of her underground prison, but the world she faced above ground required a new kind of bravery, facing the aftermath, confronting injustice, and finding purpose in survival. Her advocacy work expanded beyond immediate awareness campaigns. She testified in related cases, advised on policy reforms, and participated in survivor support programs. She turned trauma into action, proving that even the darkest experiences could have a lasting, positive impact. Yet, She never minimized the pain she endured. She openly acknowledged that recovery was a lifelong process. Some days were easier, some more challenging, but each step forward, whether big or small, reaffirmed her resilience. Surviving 88 days underground was an extraordinary feat. But surviving in the world afterward, confronting trauma, public attention, and the shadows of her past required a courage far beyond what most could imagine. She also sought to inspire other survivors. Through speaking engagements and educational programs, she shared lessons about hope, vigilance, and mental resilience. She emphasized the importance of recognizing danger, trusting instincts, and seeking help when needed. Her story became a beacon. Communities became more aware. Law enforcement refined strategies. Victims found hope in her courage. The ripples of her experience extended far beyond the walls of the underground cell she had once called home. Her journey demonstrated that surviving trauma isn't just about escape it. It's about reclaiming your life, using your voice, and transforming fear into purpose. In her personal life, she slowly rebuilt a sense of normalcy. She reconnected with friends and family, pursued education, and engaged in hobbies she had once loved. Yet she never forgot the lessons from her ordeal. Vigilance, awareness, and the power of patience and strategy in the face of danger. She honored the victims who did not survive, the people still affected by the network, and the rescuers who had worked tirelessly to dismantle the operation. Every action she took carried the weight of responsibility to remember, to educate, and to protect others from the darkness she had endured. From the darkness of an underground cell to the public spotlight of justice and advocacy, her story was a testament to the power of human endurance. Could anyone survive such an ordeal and still emerge whole? She proved it was possible, not just to survive, but to thrive. Years later, she reflected on her journey. The memory of the cell remained vivid, but it no longer controlled her. She had transformed fear into strength, despair into action, and survival into purpose. Her life became a mission, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had survived alone. Her story is a powerful reminder. Even in the darkest places, hope can survive. Courage can endure, and a single voice, brave, determined, unbroken, can shine a light into the deepest shadows. She survived 88 days underground. She faced unimaginable fear, isolation, and hunger. She emerged not only alive, but stronger, wiser, and determined to make a difference. Her story reminds us that even in the face of ultimate darkness, the human spirit can endure and transform survival into a force for justice and hope.